and I'll pass it over to Michelle. Welcome, everybody.
Welcome, everybody. What a great turnout. I think this is just a sign of how important this conversation is, of how many people showed up in community today. So thank you so much. I don't think our speakers who are joining today will disappoint you. They are here to chat about some really exciting things and also to create some shared understanding. And so with that, I'm going to ask Alana to share screen again, or I can, Alana. And I'm just going to introduce today's meeting. So as you all know, with each of these meetings that we do with the Coalition for Health Improvement, it is really important for us to have a goal for every meeting that we put together for you all. And today, what we really want to be able to do is to help tribe members quickly and effectively support the work of your fellow tribe members here. And also see yourself in places of action. So where do you show up, when, and how? And we also really want you all to feel alignment and understanding in complex health issues like housing, because they require systemic solutions, and they require solutions from multiple different sectors that are represented in our Coalition for Health Improvement. And third, for today, we also really want to see and really applaud collaboration across partners and sectors. And so you're going to see examples of that today. And really, we just want to really lean into like where that partnership has meant important things. Even though it might not be your direct sector, that partnership and the impacts of it have the power to impact the work that you do. So we'll be seeing that show up in multiple different places today. So who will we hear from today? We're going to hear from Port Angeles City Council member Lindsay Schroman Warren, who's also a policy and partnerships manager at Firelands. And Lindsay is going to be telling us about housing solutions through the lens of policy and the major pillars that need to be addressed to create more housing. Part 2 of our conversation today is going to come from our Okanogan County Housing Coalition and representatives Nancy Nash-Mendez, Executive Director of the Okanogan County Housing Authority, and also Rena Schauber, Executive Director of Okanogan County Community Action Council. And they are going to be telling us a little bit about the homeless and low-income housing landscape since the last time that they shared. What does that look like in Okanogan County right now? What are some of the resources and wins that have been hard fought? And here again, we're going to really celebrate the work that has been done to date, but also hear about the asks where partners have shown up and really will need to continue to show up for housing. And then also we have special guests from the Office of Rural and Farm Worker Housing, also known as ORF, Representatives Doug Bombersbach and Colin Thompson. They are housing developers, and they are also saviors to many of our partners here in Okanogan County who are delving into the work of brick and mortar and creating affordable housing. And so we want to thank you, Doug and Colin, because you have done amazing work with Okanogan County. And they're here to share about technical assistance and why and how complex state and federal funding is, and why it is necessary to receive that technical assistance in rural communities. And then also, potentially, if we have time, hopefully we can hear from them about how other rural communities have gotten creative with housing, not just from housing partners, but also other people delving into housing, because it really is a problem that you're starting to see other players show up in that arena. So with that, I'm going to take us a little bit zoom out. We're going to zoom out, and I'm going to go to, if you can take me to the next slide, Alana. We're going to just remind you all of our tribe purpose, and then we're going to come into this issue of housing. So our tribe purpose: we are a community network working to eliminate health disparities in Okanogan communities so every person has the opportunity to live a full and healthy life. And so why housing? Why do we talk about housing in the CHI? And we're going to go to the next slide. And what we really want to share with you all is that housing is vital to human health. It's vital to economic stability. And it's also vital to our community because it is a place where people build stability and security across generations. And so what we know is that housing is a vital condition. We know that access to safe and stable housing, specifically near schools, employment, public transportation, and food and services, has the power to promote health and well-being. And also, when you lack humane housing, what ends up happening is you see essentially the stealing of wealth from multiple generations. And so we see that socially across generations, probably most prominently at the national level for African Americans. And also, through processes like redlining and things like that. And we also see that at individual level, both in economic security and with real health conditions. So we put a little image here on the screen that shows how, compared to the general population, people who experience homelessness experience serious health conditions at a far higher rate than the general pop. And so the people who are experiencing homelessness can be seen in red, and people in the general population can be seen in gold. And we see that these conditions are far more prevalent in populations who have experienced homelessness, things like asthma, tuberculosis, dementia, chronic obstructive lung disease, cirrhosis. So with that, I'm going to go to the next slide, and I'm going to transition you all into the conversation that we're about to have with Lindsay around policy. But we just want to provide a reminder about our conversation that we had last time about cloud and clock. So housing is a complex problem with a spectrum of solutions. And if you all remember, we have the clock solutions which are solvable, they're fixable, they're time bound. And then we also have those cloud level solutions, which are not about fixing, they are about shifting systems, they are about healing communities, and they take decades to do. And if you can ping me through the animations, Alana, that would be super helpful. And so from our clock, you can see something along the lines of creating emergency shelter. That is a time-bound solution. It is possible to do, it is addressable. You get somebody from sleeping on the streets immediately into housing, or if there is available emergency shelter. And then if you can ping me through all the way to the shift heal decades, that would be helpful. Awesome. And on the other end of the spectrum, we have we know this is a complex system, and if we want to do system transformation all the way at the other end, we really have to evaluate the network of actors, the political forces, the economic forces, and the health and cultural forces that are driving and sustaining houselessness in order for us to disrupt and heal our communities. And so with that, Lindsay is going to take us in, and we're going to be talking about policy, and we're going to be talking about some wins that have been had, and also just kind of giving us that broad overview of housing. Why is it a problem? Why is it a problem at the policy level? And we're going to share Lindsay's slides. Internet is a little, sorry about that.
You, Michelle?
Yeah.
Cool.
Cool.
All right.
Thank you so much. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, all right, Lindsay, you're good to go.
All right. Hi, everybody. I am dropping in from Port Angeles, Washington. But I was actually just recently up in Okanogan County on a vacation. My spouse loves birding and is as a bird guide here in the Olympic Peninsula and Olympic National Park. And so every vacation we take turns into a birding trip. And we were very excited to find 9 species of woodpeckers, including a blackback woodpecker up at Loop Loop Campground. And just had a great time up in Okanogan County. So it was the first time, I think, in 12 years being up there. And, so I don't have a lot of experience in your area, but living in Port Angeles, my hometown, Clallam County is about 76,000 people. I think Okanogan County is like 43,000 or something, if I remember correct. We have a few large cities. Port Angeles, well, not large, but large by rural standards. Port Angeles is just over 20,000 people now. But I think your largest cities are all still maybe under 5,000, with OMAC being the largest. So some variation, but a lot of the challenges that we're dealing with rural housing in Clallam County and the Olympic Peninsula is very similar to, I think, what you're probably dealing with as well. So I just want to share kind of where I'm coming from in this. And my task was to share what happened in the state legislature last session. I'm going to fail at that task because so much happened in the legislature around housing. Some people want to call it a year of housing, but I'll talk about some of the highlights. And more importantly, I want to share some ways of thinking about housing policy because it is so connected at the local level, state level, and federal level. And then some of the things that Michelle already shared about kind of what's going to happen short-term, long-term, et cetera. So that's a photo I took on the last trip to your area and a little bit about me. So next slide, please. So just to level set, homelessness is a housing problem. This is a slide of research done by the State Department of Commerce, and all things being equal, as rents grow, homelessness increases. You can see the trend line there between the blue is the median rent, and the dotted red is the per capita unsheltered homelessness. They follow each other pretty well. Department of Commerce has looked at, well, could it be drug use? Could it be this other thing? Could it be education levels? And none of those correlate the same way that rent. This is a housing problem leading to homelessness. Next slide, please. So a lot of lawmakers in the Washington legislature are starting to think about the policies they're passing in 3 different buckets of housing policy. And one of those is what they're calling supply, more new homes to reduce the shortage and cool rents and prices. That's the hope anyway. I know for us in Port Angeles, as we've been upzoning, which is the wonky word for allowing more housing types and more density in our central city, we're actually seeing a lot of that going to short-term rentals and vacation rentals and or just second homes. And so there's a challenge with supply in rural areas that you may be dealing with that as well. Stability is the other bucket that we need to protect folks who don't have housing security. This is often protections for renters, ability for new homeowners to be able to access homeownership. And then finally, subsidy. A lot of folks, especially anyone under 30% area median income, is never going to be able to afford to buy a home or rent at normal market prices. So we do need to subsidize folks, often the most vulnerable people, often people with severe disabilities who are in our communities and need that level of support. Next slide, please. This is a slide I put together on kind of thinking about why aren't we seeing a lot of housing coming into our area, in Port Angeles. We need 3 things to happen on the ground to build and maintain housing. One of those is the physical, the land availability and the utilities to connect to that parcel. Another is the financial. Does it work for the developer, whether public or private or some kind of partnership, to actually be able to afford to build that? Can they get the capital to do it? And then also maintain it too is a huge issue. And then legal, is it an allowed use? Does it fit within existing regulations? So that 3-legged stool, you need all 3 in order to stand up housing. And if you're missing one, the housing is not going to happen. So I also include on this slide to the right a quote from Jenny Schultz's book, Fixer Upper, How to Repair America's Broken Housing Systems, which I definitely recommend. And Jenny Schultz says, housing sits at the intersection of several complex systems. So, this could probably be a 5-hour presentation instead of an attempted 10-minute presentation. So I apologize that we're just at the 30,000-foot level. Next slide, please. So another way to think about this is, when we're going to start to see our actions intervening in the housing system. And, I put 2 axes on this table. One is short-term, medium-term, long-term. Michelle talked about that a little bit already, but how long does it take to stand up some of this stuff and make it happen? Another is these 3 buckets on the left side. One is housing availability. Is there the space? Is there the place for somebody to live, regardless of cost? And then below that is housing affordability, which is, can people afford the housing that's available in the community? And if they can't, it becomes economic homelessness. Folks who are homeless simply because they cannot afford the rent. And then there's a third area, which is chronic homelessness. And that's folks often with severe disabilities who fit a very technical definition of homelessness. But this is a disability justice issue for people with chronic homelessness. And our solutions are different at every level of this. So if you go to the next slide, which unfortunately is way too busy to actually dissect each of these things. This is just me personally throwing different policy ideas and innovations that people are talking about into these different buckets of, where are they going to happen and when are they going to happen? If you look just in the upper right, new construction, we're spending a lot of time in Port Angeles on changing our zoning regulations, but we're not really going to see that new construction in the near term. It's going to take a while for developers to figure out if they can continue to do that. We've had, for example, multifamily tax exemption as an option in the city ever since 2018. And we just now have our first developer using multifamily tax exemption to be able to get a project financed that is 2 duplexes on a lot that used to only allow 1 housing unit. Next slide, please. So just a few things in terms of what's the big picture solutions that we talk about? Because a lot of times we're talking about housing in a very complex conversation where people, want, well, what are the solutions? So one of the things that I've been saying to folks is we need more inexpensive small housing units in walkable neighborhoods. This is coming from the research from Department of Commerce and also what we see at the city level or potentially at the county level on how do we actually create the infrastructure to support housing, because you don't just plop a home down and expect it to be connected to roads or streets or a place to discharge sewage or the electrical grid or a water supply. And part of that is a saying we started to say within Association of Washington Cities, shout out to Mayor Moody on the call, thank you, is that we don't have affordable housing unless we have affordable infrastructure. An organization called Strong Towns has really been pushing a lot of those messages and, how do we create financial sustainability in small towns and larger towns across the United States. So I highly recommend looking at Strong Towns work. This map walk score is the high school in OMAC, and it just shows, kind of a score if you want to quantify walkability for how easy it is to walk from a particular location. And the more that we focus on more inexpensive small housing units in walkable areas, the less we'll be expanding our cost for infrastructure as we try to make housing more available. Next slide, please. Another big thing to talk about in this is that permanent supportive housing is vital for our most vulnerable residents. And it's actually cheaper long-term than our current solution or non-solution, which is chronic homelessness, leaving people on our streets to, as Michelle talked about at the top of the meeting, often die 20 years before they otherwise would die. So there's a lot of good reasons from a human health perspective to provide permanent supportive housing, but just from the government budget perspective, it is cheaper than the services that people go to when they're living in their car or living on the street, which is the 911 crisis response system, the emergency department of the hospital. All of those are really expensive systems that are more expensive than providing people who can't otherwise afford to get into housing with a place to live. So this article, Penny Wise but Pound Foolish, is out of Seattle University School of Law, and I highly recommend it as an intro to the concept of permanent supportive housing and the benefits of housing first policy. Next slide, please. So one of the things that was a huge controversy in the state legislature and among cities as well this last session and previous sessions was a middle housing bill, which did pass earlier this year. The byline for it, House Bill 1110 or 1110, increasing middle housing in areas traditionally dedicated to single family detached housing. What people mean when they say missing middle, if you look at the graphic on the bottom, are those housing types between your standalone detached home and a larger apartment building. So things like duplexes, things like triplexes or townhouses, things like smaller apartment buildings, things like cottage housing, and those much more flexible housing types that help to provide infill. The theory behind the middle housing bill is ideally developers will start to build more density within cities or places already connected to infrastructure and be able to build out the unit shortage that we're seeing across the state. Next slide, please. The way that the middle housing bill was negotiated, however, and what ultimately passed means that cities over 25,000 are required to allow those middle housing types. Smaller cities are not. Unless they're connected in a major metropolitan area, which Okanogan County obviously is not. So the cities in Okanogan County are not affected by the middle housing bill. That doesn't mean that you can't create more density within the walkable areas of your cities, but you're not required to by the state. So that whole conversation that we had at Association of Washington Cities, which was, I think, traumatic for the city family, doesn't affect smaller cities. Next slide, please. Let's see, another area which I would love support if somebody on the call is familiar with this part of it, is that the state now requires in Growth Management Act planning more detail about how the plan is going to accommodate all housing affordability or housing affordability for all income levels. And this is a huge change from what was previously just, encourage affordable housing. This is going to require actual numbers and, a plan that is going to make sure, hopefully, that people, less than the area median income or even less than 120% area median income are able to afford to live in the community where they live. I like to say I want the people of Port Angeles who work in Port Angeles to be able to live in Port Angeles. And that's going to be a tough ask in an area where incomes are really low. Next, please. So this is when different counties are going to have to adopt those expanded requirements around affordable housing in their comprehensive plans. Okanogan County is due in 2027, which is the last group of counties that is going through their next periodic update, which is usually every 6 years. You'll have the opportunity to learn from most of the other counties that are doing this year, especially for the central, Puget Sound area. Next year, 2025, for the county I live in and other counties on the west side. However, Okanogan County is only partially planning under the Growth Management Act. And so I don't know how this law affects you and whether this is going to be a requirement that you have to do or if you would have to opt into and voluntarily do. And I'll pause if somebody on the call who's much more familiar with what it means to live in a partially planning county under the State Growth Management Act could help fill in this part. That would be awesome.
Lindsay, this is Rena Shopper, and I checked with our county commissioners this morning and with the Department of Commerce, and Okanogan County has opted out of HB 1220 and HB 1110. They are not they're not required to do a full planning under the Growth Management Act. So I was told that we need to advocate for ourselves around these issues, that the laws that are put into place do not apply to us.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate it. Yeah, so the theory with the Growth Management Act is 95% of the population of Washington State is covered by these fully planning counties. But unfortunately, that puts us in a challenging situation in a place like Okanogan County. And so yeah, advocating for yourself is the place where you're at with these rules. So, and I think too, I'm going to speculate that House Bill 1337, which I referenced on this slide, that requires more accessory dwelling unit flexibility within urban growth, sorry about the typo, areas, is also then probably an option that you could do, but is not going to be required, would be my guess. Anyone else want to fill in? All right, thanks. Next slide, please. So one thing that I think does apply and is really helpful in rural areas is recent laws that make it easier to preserve mobile home parks, which are often naturally occurring low-income housing. When we're thinking about larger urban areas where land price is more expensive, often our low-income housing is apartments. In rural areas, our low-income housing is mobile home parks. So there has been a law in Washington allowing the residents to have the opportunity to try to purchase. It was really weak. It had a lot of ways for the owner and the prospective seller to skirt around it and not really give that opportunity. So this recently passed law expands the ability for the communities to purchase. Rock Northwest, resident-owned communities Northwest, which is the Northwest Cooperative Development Center, and I apologize, I'll add that to the slide, is probably our lead organization for helping to make this happen and creating resident-owned communities in mobile home parks where the mobile home park residents own the land collectively as a cooperative. So this hopefully will make that more possible as mobile home parks come up for sale. Also, the Washington legislature budgeted $6 million for this park preservation and acquisition fund. So tracking when these parks are coming up for sale is really key. The Department of Commerce recently released a registry where you can sign up to get notices of when mobile home parks are coming up for sale. So that system's there now to hopefully be able to intervene earlier and help the residents own the land underneath their mobile home parks. We talk about these as mobile homes. They're not very mobile. They usually sit where they're going to be, and it's very hard to move them. Next slide, please. So I have a number of slides here that are the state legislative session outcomes as described by the Washington Low Income Housing Alliance. This slideshow will be available to you, and so I'm not going to just read off I think 10 slides of detailed information about what actually passed. But I will say that the Low Income Housing Alliance is a great resource for us to advocate through. And I would highly recommend that people individually and also your organizations, if you're not already, join the Low Income Housing Alliance. The easiest way is just sign up for the action alerts. You can do that without actually joining, giving money. But think about participating in housing and homeless action days during the legislative session. It's usually in February, and it's a great opportunity to track these issues more thoroughly. So much of it is multi-year issues, and be able to advocate with your legislative district representatives for these policies that are helping to make housing available to everybody. I will stop there. And happy to take questions now, but if it makes more sense, I'm going to stay on the call until 1 o'clock. And so happy to be involved later on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lindsay. That was absolutely terrific. I am amazed at how much you were able to pack in such a short slot of time, but we are so grateful. And I am going to encourage people to ask questions in the chat because Lindsay will be on the call until 1 o'clock. And if you are available for that 5-hour tutorial, absolutely would love to be a part of that one. So feel free to drop in your questions into the chat for Lindsay or anyone else. We have lots of experts on the call and do really want to get people answers around some of these complex issues. So with that, I'm moving on to part 2. And for part 2 of our conversation, we're going to be talking about what specifically is going on in Okanogan County. Historically, what has happened, the challenges that have been faced in brick and mortar and housing development, and also where you all show up as partners in these efforts. And so I'm going to turn to Rena Shaver, Executive Director of Okanogan County Community Action Council, and Nancy Nash-Mendez, Executive Director of the Okanogan County Housing Authority. All right, Nancy and Rena, I am going to share your slides, and these I am going to share because it's going to get a little bit tricky here. And really, we're just going to start out with you all sharing a little bit about the Okanogan County Housing Coalition, its history, its purpose, and just share kind of what that group is about. Can you all see my slideshow here?
Yes.
Excellent. All right, Rena.
Do it. Okay. You're going to prompt me with questions, right? Or did you want me to start?
Yes. Yeah. So tell us about the Okanogan County Housing Coalition.
Well, first, thank you, Michelle and Alana, for having us here. This is a great discussion, and what a great turnout. I'm Rena Shaver. I'm the Executive Director for the Okanogan County Community Action Council, which is a mouthful. It's your local community action agency, and we are heavily involved in keeping people housed in our community through our rent eviction programs. I'm also a member of the Okanogan County Housing Coalition, and we're going to talk a little bit about what those activities that we do on the coalition are. We are a membership of probably 8 different agencies that provide program support for people to keep them housed and to build housing, permanent supportive housing programs in the county. And that is our mission and our goal of the group, which is a fairly new group. We just, I've been at community action for just about a year, and that's just about how long the newly formed coalition of these agencies, which include Community Action, the Housing Authority of Okanogan County, Orville Housing Authority, Colville Indian Housing Authority, the Support Center, Room 1, Fire, Okanogan Community Homeless Shelter, and Okanogan Behavioral Health Care Shelter. These are the agencies that are currently represented on the coalition. So, and we meet twice a month, and we talk about these issues, and I think we're making some headway.
Thanks, Rena. Do you want to share just kind of a brief overview of the Housing Coalition activities?
Sure. You want to prompt me with the next slide, please?
Absolutely. Thanks.
So these are the major areas that the Housing Coalition are actively involved in. The annual PIT count, which is the point in time count that's required by HUD every year, which happens in January, which is not a great time to be out on the streets counting people because we have 4 feet of snow on the ground. But I'll talk more about the PIT count in a second. We're also involved in strategic planning for housing for the county. We're trying to raise awareness about, like in formats today, for what it's like to live without housing in Okanogan County. We're involved in outreach and advocacy. We are working, most of our agencies are working with our state representatives and agencies. We're also involved in working with some of our federal representatives for housing, including USDA Rural Development and HUD. And we are launching into creating our next 5-year homeless housing plan, and the coalition will be responsible, the members will be responsible for helping implement that. So those are our major activities.
Thanks, Rena. So one of the things that we promised today was to be able to talk about the power of partnership. And I think one thing that was probably really apparent in the last year when it came to partnership was the approach to the pit that was had in 2023. And so what we did, the pit is the point in time count. What we did as the CHI was we kind of highlighted what was going on in a Health Insight article and shared that out with the CHI and tried to really raise awareness about the point in time count. But what was going on behind the scenes was really beautiful. And I'd love for you to share, what that looked like. How was it different than previous years? What was the difference in terms of numbers for the pit?
Right. So if you want to prompt me with the next slide, please. Thank you. So the community action is responsible for making sure that the pit count happens every year in Okanogan County. And that falls under our obligations under a contract with the Department of Commerce under the Consolidated Housing Grant. So the point in time count happens in every county across every state in the United States the same week, same 10-day period of time in January. So people in Florida have it a lot easier than people in Okanogan during that week to be able to go out and talk to and find out how many people are living without housing in their communities. And the reason that the pit count is so important is that funders like HUD are making decisions based on the count that we provide to the Department of Commerce, who then turns around and provides it to the HUD. They're making funding decisions about housing based on the count that we turn in. In 2022, our count, because of the pandemic, our count was very low. I think it was like 54 or 59. And this year we made, the coalition members made a pact and said, we need to get that count where it really might reflect what's going on in the community. So the coalition members, all the agencies band together. We split the county. Every city in the county had a leader from one of the coalition agencies or from community action. And we created a number of found locations where we could reach out to people who might be homeless, including all of our food pantries, all of the locations where we know that people who are homeless, like Man Fisher Ministries and the homeless shelter in Okanogan. We've just spread out across the entire county with all these agencies. And I have to say it was an impressive effort with people with clipboards and forms going out and talking to people and asking them, where did you sleep last night? And the answer and what we recorded as a homeless person is a place that's not normally meant for human habitation. And by HUD's definition, that means they slept out of doors on the street or in a tent. They were in an RV or a boat that lacked any of the following amenities, which included drinking water, a restroom, heat, ability to cook hot food, or ability to bathe. They were in an abandoned building, or they were sleeping in a vehicle. And our count this year, we turned in 600 forms, and Commerce came back and verified 290 as our count. They excluded things like temporarily living with family and friends or sleeping in an institution like jail or other facility. We know in Okanogan County, we have a lot of people living in RVs that are not connected to services, and we have a lot of people who are doubling up in housing and youth who are couch surfing. So we think the real count is probably in the thousands of people who fall under the definition of homelessness. And this count of 290, as I mentioned, is extremely important when it comes to working with our funders. I think Nancy will talk about that in a little bit. But that's the pit count that happened this year. We improved significantly with the help of all of our partnering agencies and volunteers, and it'll be coming up again. So we'll start to get organized around that for the next January pit count here pretty soon.
Thanks, Rena. And I just want you to do a plug to the people on the CHI about, what would be nice to see from, of course, everybody who was involved last year, definitely being involved in 2024. But is there another ask that you might have of the CHI membership in terms of the PIP?
Absolutely. I think we missed some of our facilities last year in the count. So if you're representing a hospital or a clinic or another agency, we'd like to coordinate with you. We'd also like to have more volunteers who are out with clipboards doing the count. So hopefully we'll be invited back to talk to the CHI members about getting organized around next year's PIP count and have a volunteer sign-up sheet of some kind so that people can help with the count. We do it over 5 days in our county. Some communities do it in 1 day, but because our county is so huge and we have a smaller group of volunteers, we've chosen to do it over 5 days, which is allowable. So we'll get back to you, and we would love to have your participation in next year's PIP count.
Thanks, Rena. So I am going to pivot over to Nancy, unless there are any questions in the chat with respect to the point in time count. And Rena, are you the best contact for the point in time count, or is there somebody, if somebody wants to get involved, who would be the best person for people to contact?
Yeah, our entire agency is involved in the PIT count. So just call Community Action at 509-442-4041. They can ask for me, they can ask for Jen Harper, or they can ask for Miranda Maple. Any of the three of us can fill them in on what's going to happen and take down volunteer names so that we can get you involved in next year's count.
Thank you. Thank you, Rena. And I'm going to pivot to Nancy. Nancy, one of the findings that, an image and a graphic that showed up in Lindsay's slides and that we shared out in our invitation to everybody who came to the meeting today was that graphic from Washington State Department of Commerce showing the homes that, the new homes that need to be built in the next 20 years. And sometimes when I talk about you, Nancy, and you're not around, I say Nancy is single-handedly building affordable housing in Okanogan County. And so, Nancy, I want to both celebrate you today and also, allow you the floor so that you can share with us both your wins and also how hard it is to fight for affordable housing in Okanogan County. So can you tell us a little bit about just a brief overview of the number of units that you have seen, not just you, but also the number of units that might be opening up through the work of the Oroville Housing Authority or other projects that you know of, and also kind of some challenges that you've experienced?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for creating this space where we can share, where we can be with our cheerleaders. And I always consider the CHI my tribe, where I can come in, be nurtured, and be challenged most of the time as well. Thank you so much to each one of you for the work you are doing in your communities. Housing, and specifically affordable housing, is a very, very complex world to live in. And like Lindsay has said, I love the image that he created with the chair with the tripod. It's, in my experience, I have been with the agency for 8 years. We have been able to successfully develop over 60 units and acquired 3 different rural development properties, soon to be 4. So in 8 years, we have increased our units portfolio from under 50 to over 200. So we are working hard. We are working every day to be able to either acquire or develop brick and mortars, because our 5-year plan, and especially the board of directors of the Housing Authority of Okanogan County. And kudos to Dr. Brendan Smith, who is a board member of the Housing Authority. Thanks for your service, Dr. Smith. We have noticed that administrations can come and go, and Section 8 vouchers it is so volatile. One year we have a lot of funding, the next year we may not. Therefore, focusing our effort as an agency in brick and mortars, acquiring more, increasing our portfolio has been very, very important to us. When we started our project, our dream, the first development that we have of 46 units of tax-rated property, it was our first development basically for the agency. It took us from 2015, the conception where the applications were sent off, to the time we brought in 46 families. That was 2015 we started, and we ended construction in 2022. That gives you an idea of how hard it is, how long it takes to build affordable housing. And in between are the struggles. And in between are the partners like ORF. I'm so glad that they are going to be doing a presentation as well. Without ORF, without their technical assistance, we will not be doing what we're doing, and nor will we be able to keep developing affordable housing throughout the county. Not only the physical, the complexity of development is it hard and lengthy, but it's also, it's a word out there. Housing Trust Fund, you think there are millions of dollars in allocated for affordable housing, but we are competing. The small county like Okanogan County Housing Authority is competing with developers who perhaps are going to be developing affordable housing for a certain period and then selling it off, or we're competing with the big guys. So A is very, very competitive. Any funding that we have is very competitive. Also, for a small agency like ours, we don't have the capital to be able to just go and buy land. And owning a land makes any application so much more, it helps the agency to be situated in a place where we can get the funding necessary to build. Like any other grant process, we can have the most compelling story, the best budget and pro forma. But if we don't own the land, most of the time the applications just go aside until basically you own the land. And I am saying land several times because there is a beautiful partnership story that I'm going to be sharing towards the end of my presentation. Financial, putting the pieces together is almost like a quilter. In fact, I have 2 quilts in my office that just remind me that anytime we put any purchase together, any plan to develop, it is literally like a quilt. We are putting the pieces together. Is normally about 5 to 7, 10 funders. Sometimes a little bit of here, a little bit of there helps. But also maintaining these units, there are struggles. Like recently, we had we thought it was a pipe that broke in one of our properties and ended up being the sewer system. And those are our budget for affordable housing. Because of the rent ceiling is so low, it's very hard to have the resources necessary to be able to fix these major problems that you don't anticipate. That's the reason why we really appreciate the House bills that allow us to have funding throughout the county, the homeless fund, to be able to access in case of emergency. But also our mission is to provide housing to those in need. While that is lofty, it is so also incredibly complex to be a landlord in today's landscape. We have all the social determinants of health being played into your apartment unit. You may have drug addiction, you may have meth addiction, that with one remediation one unit can cost $25,000, $30,000 if the unit is really bad to be able to rehab. But once again, I want to focus in the positive, because from a 24 unit complex, there may be one or two families who are a struggle. Excuse me, often we call them our colicky tenants, who just need a little bit more attention. And like I said, dealing with all these issues that are predominant in our societies. Our tenants, our site managers require a lot of training and skills necessary to be trauma informed, to be able to be good servants to our tenants as well. Going into, I think I covered enough the struggles, and any questions anytime. I am always available to be reached, and just any suggestions you may have for us, just put it in the chat or send me an email. Right now, we are thankful that there are more movements going on throughout the county. We have the Oroville Housing Authority, who's going to be developing units of multifamily up in Oroville. As your housing authority for the county, we serve the whole county with our voucher program. But as per our RCW, that establishes a housing authority, and a city can create an affordable housing housing authority to work towards the solutions of housing for low-income families. That's the Oroville have their own housing authority. And I celebrate with them this triumph of putting all the funding together to be able to develop these units. The housing authority is also in the process of, like I said, acquiring 30 units as senior housing, which is a victory as well, because that way we have 30 low-income families who will not be losing their rental assistance. Another, I am sure Michelle can share the story of fire and their development that is happening. Those are exciting developments that is going on throughout Okanogan County. And currently, we are always looking 5 years out. Once we acquire the land, we are, myself as the executive director, I'm working with ORF and the board to be able to say, okay, so where do we pivot next? In which community do we go? Because we're a small agency, we cannot be building in every city of the county. So currently we are in the process of putting together our applications for Wild Rose, is a multifamily development in Winthrop. And remember when I said owning the land is the key to access funding to develop. Well, the relationship that the Housing Authority have created with the Methow Housing Trust, it is paying dividends, huge dividends for the people in Winthrop and the Methow Valley. Through that relationship, we have been able to, we have been gifted this land, close to 2 acres by the Methow Housing Trust, to be able to develop 22 units of affordable housing. And that is huge. And I wish that either the executive director or board members of the Methow Housing Trust are part of these CHI meetings, because I think they are doing such a big work in providing affordable housing for families to purchase homes using the land trust model. As I said, there are a lot of movements, a lot of positive step forward towards expanding housing opportunities for low-income families in Okanogan County. But as you saw that first chart, we cannot build fast enough, because it takes literally like 5 to 7 years to get the funding necessary. And just to give you an example, out of the 46 units that we developed here in OMAC, we have over 200 people on our wait list. And so basically, multiply 200 the need just in OMAC alone. I also would like to take this time to, speaking about Meadow Point, our multifamily family here in in OMAC. recently I was asked a question, and yet one more time I have been asked this question. A question is, are you guys building these new apartments to bring the homeless from Seattle to Okanogan County? So it's just one last question. I said, I have to get statistics on this. So we started digging in the current families who are residing at Methow. Out of the 46 families, we have 2 families who are out of the county. And both families are already engaged in social services, and they were already in the process of moving to Okanogan County, where the social services reside. So out of that, one is out of Bridgeport, actually, and the other one is our neighboring county up north by Republic. So that shows you that the housing we are building are for our people, are the people that you are serving. And we need to do more. And that is why the engagement with CHI members is so important, as we ask for a letter of engagement, or we express the need of, sometimes it's funding need, sometimes it's support that we need. And obviously, we will, once again, I want to say, without partners like or the Office of Rural and Farm Worker Housing, we will not be where we are at today in Okanogan County. I will stop there. I entertain any questions that the audience may have for us.
Thank you so much, Nancy. And I just want to reiterate that point about the, that story, that narrative that gets shared about, there are many different narratives that get shared about homelessness, about affordable housing. And I think when we talked about the myth that you were hearing and you provided that data, it wasn't long before myself and several other people heard it come up, just working and engaging with community about Methow Point and other affordable housing projects. And so thank you for sharing that.
Yep. And
please feel free to ask any questions in the chat. I am going to ask Rena and Nancy, either one of you can answer this question, but right now, the Okanogan County Housing Coalition has a small pot of funds, and I just want to be really, pointed about, that pot of funds. How reliable is it to be able to tap that pot of funds for housing development? Is it big enough? Just share if either one of you can share about that pot, what it is, and the nature of it for brick and mortar.
I think Rena is the numbers queen. I am the storyteller. So let me say the story first. The pot is very small. Seemingly is large, but when we're dealing with a development, for example, of $10 million, and the county fund, the homeless county fund, is traditionally used for local matches. And that local match is so very important to make our applications more, to score higher. But also, there are times like when we develop our 16-unit senior housing, we were $250,000 short with the budget just because of COVID and the increase of construction materials. Without those funds, we would have stopped construction, not being able to finish. But also, I know that those funds are used heavily for programs throughout the county, such as like the Shove House, such as the support center, and other agencies uses the fund as well. So it's so important to us, and it's not enough. And I believe there are House bills out there that we can tap into that is not being adopted in Okanogan County that we need champions to help us make sure that our county commissioners are passing every single House bill that is going to allow us to bring the funding necessary to be able to build the brick and mortars, to provide the permanent housing services that we need in order for us to slowly get out of this crisis where we are in.
Thank you, Nancy. Rena, do you want to numbers queen us?
Sure. I'll fill in the numbers. Well, as Nancy mentioned, these are multi-million-dollar projects, and the agencies that are building like Nancy have to be going out and seeking grants and money from outside the county to put up these projects. And it does help if the community, the county, brings money to the table in terms of matching funds and land and for gap funding when the cost of construction goes up. And these are long-term projects, and the cost of construction always goes up in them. And these projects always have some kind of a construction gap. So what are our county resources for housing? If you want to put up that slide, Michelle.
Let's see if I can be successful this time. Success.
There we go.
Awesome.
So the total revenue for Okanogan County for affordable housing and homeless housing programs combined was less than $443,000 last year. $309,000 went to homeless housing, $132,000 went to affordable housing. Homeless housing is a pot of money for programs, and the affordable housing is for brick and mortar. Now, combined, those two pots don't really, they won't build anything. We're looking at a very limited source of funding from our communities to be able to be competitive with grants in order to bring more housing to the community. And just, we've had a decrease in our recording fees, which is the homeless housing fee, of about 23%. And that's not just in our county, that's across the state of Washington. So some of these funds are dwindling as real estate fluctuates. The Washington State Office of Financial Management claims that Okanogan County is behind in housing by over 2,000 units. Actually, it's 2,063 units. And of those, about 450 are for permanent supportive housing and 100 for homeless housing. So, and as Nancy mentioned, she'll work on a project for 5 to 7 years, open the doors on a new housing development, and within a month the development will be filled. And you can see why when you look at the number that we're behind by 2,000 units in the county. And that also bears out in the 2020 Okanogan County Housing Needs Assessment, that our county is very much behind, which is why we are in building housing, and which is why we're in the housing crisis that we have right now. I don't know if you want to go into detail about these two funds, but we could actually skip these next two slides. It just breaks down where the money comes from. But the bottom line is the Affordable Housing Fund is a portion of the sales tax revenue shared. We give about 6.5% to the state. We get a little bit back for the Affordable Housing Fund. And as I mentioned, those revenues are about $132,000. For the Homeless Housing Fund, that's a surcharge of $10 for each document recorded with the county. And those revenues last year are about $309,000. So, and those are the ones that are down because recording fees are down. So these are not huge pots of money to be able to draw on to be competitive for grants, purchase land, or be able to run programs, which a lot of the money right now is going towards to support people from eviction and to run rapid rehousing programs. So we are looking at creative ways to hopefully get our community involved in looking at additional resources for housing.
Thank you, Rena. Yes, we will send the details of the slides sides to the chai. So I appreciate you compiling that information. And I do think we have a question from Dr. Smith with respect to balances how Okanogan County manages the spectrum of housing needs and economic needs to support local economies. Rena, Nancy, or anybody else on the call, if you have an answer to that question, please chime it in to the chat. And I can share it if anybody has an answer to that question. Nancy several times mentioned the Office of Rural Farm Worker Housing, and they are known as ORF. And we have Doug and Colin here with us today. And I just wanted to allow them a few moments to share on what they have seen in terms of the complexity of federal and state monies that are allotted to affordable housing. And then also, if you can share one creative solution that you have seen, Colin or Doug, where you have seen non-housing partners or non-housing entities step into housing in rural communities, that would be excellent.
Go ahead, Doug. You can go first.
Sure. Thanks, Colin. Thank you for inviting us to the meeting. That's as you mentioned, we refer to ourselves as ORF, so that makes Colin and I orphans. The complexities that was mentioned with either creating or preserving affordable housing is what ORF has specialized in. Especially, we work primarily in rural communities, and as was mentioned by everybody, was how complicated it is and how much perseverance it takes, because it's unfortunately such a long process. And Lindsay mentioned that the three-legged stool, and those are the areas that ORF can assist on with our technical assistance. And one great thing about, we're in a position to where we can provide our expertise and resources without charge to our sponsors until the funding closes for the project and the construction starts. But some of the things that we provide support and assistance in all the phases of development is from the concept of creating the housing and the feasibility. We help with things like assessing local housing need and demand, analyzing the project viability, land and zoning issues, identifying source of capital, preliminary operating pro forma, applying for public funding from multiple sources, which Nancy mentioned. It's like putting a quilt together, which gets extremely complex. And those funding applications are competitive. One thing that I was told, that historically the Housing Trust Fund gets twice as many applications that they can fund. And so what ORF can do is to help our sponsors, help their application be as competitive as possible, so that increases the likelihood that hopefully they'll get approved from the Housing Trust Fund and other public funders. We just work with the sponsors through their whole process of housing development, right on through construction, working with general contractors, architects, and right up through lease up and certificate of occupancy. So that's why that's how ORF can provide some technical assistance to help a project go from concept to actually creating more housing for the community. So
Thank you so much, Doug. And I think it's really important for people to know that you don't have to have the money secured. You all actually help with fleshing out plans, correct? And like helping secure additional funds if there's not enough funds, helping with that process.
Correct, yes. I'm relatively new to ORF. I started in about a year and a half ago, but we have folks in our agency that have our executive director, Marty Miller, has been with ORF for over 30 years. And several other of our staff have been with the agency for a long time, and they have such a knowledge base of resources and funding sources that are out there that we can assist our funders and our sponsors in accessing.
Excellent. Thank you, Doug.
Yeah,
If
thanks.
you, oh, sorry, Colin. I was going to just ask
ahead.
if you all could drop your website into the chat. We also have it in the invite. That way people can look you all up and kind of see a little bit more about what you do. And Colin, I don't know if you want to share about, the creative question. Where have you seen housing partners, non-housing partners, non-traditional housing people show up in really creative ways to support housing?
Yeah. Well, actually, yeah. Doug has a really good story for that. We were kind of going over that. But I did want to highlight a couple of things also. That one thing I've noticed since I've been here is that the housing authorities and the community action and the community leaders, they have a lot of work, a lot of ambition, and a lot of work that they they have to solve these problems. And it's but sometimes the resources just aren't adequate. They're smaller. If you compare to like Catholic Charities or the Yakima Housing Authority or the Grant County Housing Authority, they have these huge team members, maybe around 8 or 10 people that work on whether it's the development side or the operation side, where Nancy and her team, and Ashley up in Orville, and Rena, their teams are limited to 2 or 3 people. Oftentimes, Nancy is wearing 100 hats. She's just amazing with all that she does. And so development is just a small portion of what she does. And so I've noticed that ORF, we're able to act as an extension and resource to these community leaders, and doing things like Doug mentioned, which is the site assessment, site controls, feasibility studies, forming the teams, doing a lot of the pre-development work, application for funding, and really understanding the funding and how to make it competitive, like Doug mentioned. And I think one solution, as I've been working with Nancy and Ashley, and we've, oftentimes, you learn from your experiences and what works better, what works best. And I've noticed that the Housing Trust Fund, there's many different sources of public funding, whether it's, Commerce or the HTF, RD with the 515, there's HUD, there's 9% tax credits. There's a lot of funding sources, but they all have their different priorities. And the Housing Trust Fund, when we started out with Methow Point, their priority basically was general low income. And that's what we targeted during that application period with Methow Point. And even though but now if you look at what the points, the main focus for Commerce is now is more focused on homeless at entry, 50% AMI for rural, and permanent supportive housing. So there's a huge push right now with this current round that the housing that's being developed is a permanent supportive housing, and you get extra points. You get a lot of points if your project is a permanent supportive housing project. Then it's very favorable during this particular round, where that wasn't necessarily the case in previous rounds. And so the state changes their targeting perspectives, and as time goes along. And another big item that you get points for with these applications is being competitive in your total development cost. And so they'll score you compared to all the other applicants are you getting the biggest bang for the buck? Are your cost, your total development cost per square foot, lower than others, and it's really difficult. One thing that we've encountered, working there in Okanogan County, that it's a supply chain issue. There's the subcontractors. Oftentimes you need to get them from Wenatchee, from maybe even Seattle. They're just the companies, the construction companies there are far and few between, and so construction cost building in the rural area is just really a lot higher than even the state or even the federal funders can quite realize. We're trying to hit their total development cost metrics and targets, and never can we do it because it's just so expensive to build in rural areas, and like Okanogan County, and our funders just don't seem quite aware of that. And so a solution, this is a problem that we've encountered and continue to encounter. And I was thinking about, what is a solution to this? And I thought, how can we bring down our besides explaining the situation to our funders, and they do have some leniency and willing to understand, but besides that, what can we do to bring down our total development costs in our application? And one thing I thought of was, with the different programs, first we can acquire land. We acquire with the WISFIC LAP program. So you can acquire the land first, and then you can build the infrastructure. And this is kind of a model that we did in Orrville, and that's what triggered all this thought is, you buy the land, you get it all the infrastructure, and then you go out for application for housing, and that lowers your TDC. And so, because you've already got all that out of the way, and so when you submit that application, your TDC is a lot lower and more competitive. And so you're talking about some problems we've encountered, some solutions. Yeah. That's kind of one problem and one solution.
Thank you, Colin.
Yeah,
I'm actually gonna recap you if that's okay. Can I recap you? Just
please do.
We're almost at time, and I do want to just make sure I highlight some of the things you said. One of them, I think, which is really nice, is that you're reiterating a point that Nancy shared, which is land. Like land, the ability to acquire land is so important. And it's important for two reasons, for the purposes that Nancy said, which is, not just like you're saying, just to secure that funding, it would make it easier, it would reduce costs. But the second one is to make the process faster, because there are timelines with state and federal funding. And I think you're also sharing how much more expensive it is, and that oftentimes in these projects in Okanogan County, what you all have seen is a shortfall of funds from the projected budget to actual costs. And so what ends up happening is you're nearing completion of a project, and Nancy could probably speak to this better than I can, but she might be nearing completion of a project, or Ashley from the Orrville Housing Authority might be nearing the completion of the budget to submit for the contract process, and you're short $200,000. And so I think this underscores the importance of the point that Rena and Nancy mentioned, that the county housing fund, that's where local support could come in, whether it be private or public dollars. Local support could come in for that, especially during these times where we're having supply shortfalls and the nature of our rural community. So thank you so much. Doug, I think I'm going to have you share your story, maybe in the chat, but also I'd love to, just if you want to email me, I'd be happy to email that out to everybody at the CHI, just the story about creativity that you've seen in other rural areas.
Sure, I'll email you the story. It'd be kind of long to put into the chat, so I can go ahead and email it to you. So.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much. And I'm going to turn back to Rena and Nancy. because I'm going to let you close us out with your final ask of the CHI, which is there is a, it was mentioned earlier by Lindsay, we do have a housing plan that is due. There is an RFP that is being put out, and there is going to be an assessment process that I think will lean heavily on people that are part of the CHI, just naturally because you all are part of the community. And so Rena or Nancy, do either of you want to share about that?
Sure. I just want to stress how important it is to have everybody to come together around this issue. And when we're going to go out soon for an RFP to get a consultant to come in and help us with the 5-year homeless housing plan. And we would like everybody's participation from the community in this. I did want to talk about the ripple effect just for a second, and that is everybody on this line is experiencing the cost of the lack of housing in our community. It's challenging for our families who are transitioning from homelessness to housing when there is no housing. Community Action last year paid out $200,000 in rental assistance every month to keep people housed in this community. Currently, we have 7 families in hotels. We have no year-round shelter operating in that it's low barrier that operating in the county. So that's a problem for our community. We have 20 people on the shelter list. All of these families are in hotels, which they need to vacate during the OMAC stampede, which is a problem that we face because we don't have homeless shelter here. And as you know, it's difficult. The ripple effect of homelessness is that it's difficult to, if there's no housing here, that's difficult to recruit a labor force. And I'm sure the healthcare providers on the line are feeling the pinch of that. It's a strain on our public services. It costs $40,000, and this is a HUD number, to keep somebody living on the street without housing or in an RV without housing in terms of emergency response, mental health crisis response, and emergency room visits. It costs $15,000 to keep somebody housed. So we can either pay at the downstream in terms of public services, or we can pay at the source and create housing that will, we are a housing first concept agency. If we get people housed, we can work on other issues that they might have. So, but first of all, people need to be housed. And just a note that it is, this whole housing crisis is creating problems for every sector of our community, from our labor force, our healthcare providers, our policing agencies. It's in our neighborhoods. So it's going to take all of us to come together and try to figure out how to solve bringing 2,000 housing units into the county, which is what apparently the state and our own housing assessment says that we need. And I think because we are so small as a county and fall below some of the laws that have been created this year to help with housing, it really is going to be all of us, making our own determination that housing is an important issue for our community. And we hope that you're going to join us. Everybody here will join us in supporting the needs of raising awareness with our political leaders, our municipal leaders, our county commissioners, of the need of housing and the lack of resources that we have to put towards that. And we will continue to talk about that in the coming months and probably years, because it's going to take a long time to address our housing issue in the county.
I just want to add to that. This is summer break for our elected officials. Please take the time to either write to them, call them, pester them with the need of our county. Because when they are home is when they are listening to we, the people. And unless they hear from us the need that we have for housing, then when they go back to Olympia or Washington, D.C., the stories of those who are loudest is going to be the one that sticks in their mind, and perhaps they will support a bill that may not help Okanogan County. So this is the time, and I'm a firm believer that this is America, and we together we can. Juntos podemos.
Thank you, Nancy. And I think sharing the full story of housing instability is important, because oftentimes what the county commissioners hear are probably the stories that are most visible. But in rural Okanogan County, we have a lot of invisible housing instability and homelessness, and that's children and families, and so many other people who are working and still can't make ends meet. So thank you all so much for joining the call, for staying on the call. And we are at time. We will send out notes. We have fabulous PowerPoint slides from the people who joined us today. And thank you all so much. Thank you, Rena and Nancy, for doing work in this area, Doug and Colin for helping us out in Okanogan County, and to Lindsay, who's not here, but did such a great job laying the groundwork for the conversation. Thank you all.
Thank you, CHI members, for raising awareness and supporting housing.
Have a great afternoon, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.